Good evening. Welcome to the Duluth branch of the Gwinnett County Public Library. Thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm Merwin Chambers. I'm treasurer of the Friends of the Gwinnett County Public Library. If you are interested in finding out more about the Friends, please talk to my wife over at Silent Auction or Vivian here at the welcome table, or talk to me after the event is over. We're welcoming all new members. We'd like to get as many as we can. Books are for sale thanks to Eagle Eye Bookshop. Eagle Eye donates a portion of the proceeds from their sales to the library, so I encourage you to purchase your books from them. And also I'd encourage you to visit their store in Decatur. This program is being recorded tonight and can be seen on the library's YouTube author speaker playlist. Tonight's silent auction is sponsored by the Friends of the Library. The proceeds from the silent auction are used to support programs like this one, provide snacks, pay for venues if we have to pay for a venue to hold these events. The winners of the silent auction will be announced after the conclusion of tonight's program. James Rollins is a #1 New York Times best-selling author of international thrillers. His writing has been translated into 40 languages, and he has sold more than 20 million books. James's books include the best-selling Sigma Force series Sandstorm, 6 individual adventure thrillers, the blockbuster movie novelization Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the Tucker Wayne series, the Order of Sanguines series, the Jake Ransom middle grade series, Moonfall Saga, and the Starless Crown. James's latest book, which he will be discussing tonight, is Kingdom of Bones. Please join me in welcoming James Rollins.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming.
They got me mic'd up like this so I don't have to actually stand behind the podium, which I don't like to do. I found that whenever I'm sort of stuck behind a podium, for some reason, I start yelling at everybody. I don't know why. I get really angry at people. So hopefully now that I'm free and can move around, we will not have that. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for showing up, especially on Friday night. What are you guys doing here Friday night? It's beautiful out there. 80 degrees. I passed a bunch of restaurants coming in here. I don't know why you guys are here. But we will have a Q&A, so hopefully whatever curiosity drew you here, you will reveal a little bit by the questions. But how many people I've been a while since they've been here. Somebody told me, I think it's been since 2016, since I did an event in Atlanta. Has anybody been to any of my events in Atlanta, or anywhere for that matter? Just a handful of people. So most of you have never heard me speak before. So when I make up stuff that's different from what you heard, don't tell them. It's our secret. So then I guess I do have to sort of start from the beginning a little bit and talk about, how I came to be, and then I'll talk about the book, and then I'll do the Q&A, and then by the time I'm done with that, you're going to be sick of me. You'll be just shut that guy up. So let me then start from the beginning. How many people know that I'm a veterinarian? Everybody, good. So it's a weird path for a veterinarian to become an author. A lot of lawyers become authors because they hate their job. Most veterinarians, we enjoy our job. It's a dedication. We're thrilled to be able to be involved in that profession. Except apparently for me. I sort of wandered off the path a little bit. But I always wanted to be a veterinarian. I got that assignment you get in 3rd grade. I'm sure everybody in this room had this at some point in your elementary school years, where the teacher says, go home, write a couple paragraphs about what you want to be when you grow up. And I know concretely I was in 3rd grade because it was a point of a moral dilemma. I remember sitting at my desk, blank sheet of paper in front of me. Knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. Only problem, didn't know how to spell it. I thought I could put policeman, fireman, know how to spell those, and I can go out and play. But I did the one thing that all 3rd graders hate to do, got the dictionary, looked it up. That determined from 3rd grade to be a veterinarian. I'm going to fast forward a little bit in time. Now I am in the 1st year of vet school. The entering class is seated, The dean walks in to give a welcoming speech to the University of Missouri Columbia's entering class of veterinary medicine. He starts his speech with a chilling words you probably also remember from your school years. Take out a sheet of paper. You're having your first pop quiz. It's a one-question quiz. If you get it wrong, you're kicked out of vet school. Write down the word veterinarian. 3rd grade, I was ready for that question. So I did get my degree. But that's this side of my brain that loves animals, loves medicine, loves science. This side, a little weirder, a little more twisted. I blame this side of my family when I was growing up. We were raised Polish Roman Catholic. Anybody Polish Roman Catholic? Thank you. Then, to keep the Polish flag in your window, you have to have at least 6 kids. So my mom had 7, just in case she had a spare. In case something happened, she could still keep that flag in the window. But for me, it was great, because I had an early audience for my storytelling. My goal, growing up, was to terrorize my younger brothers and sisters with outlandish stories. The more fantastical, the better. If tears were involved, even better. Mom called it lying. I could just call it storytelling. Tomatoes, tomatoes. And just to give you an idea, I don't know if who raised their hand before? Did I tell the ventriloquist story when you were there last time? You did, so you heard the ventriloquist story.
That's okay.
Well, I'm going to say it again. I could switch it over to the... Okay, we'll do the ventriloquist story. There's like 3 or 4 stories I've done before, but I like the ventriloquist story the best. So I'll share a story that I give you an idea of what I write. Pretty much has not changed from what I was telling my younger brothers and sisters. And this is an example. So one year for Christmas, I innately knew I was destined to be the child prodigy of the ventriloquism world. It's like right under veterinarian was ventriloquist. The only thing that was stopping me from this global career, I didn't have a ventriloquist doll. So I begged, pleaded. Eventually my parents bowed to my begging and on Christmas Day unwrapped one of the Charlie McCarthy dolls. Remember Charlie McCarthy? Sort of creepy in and of itself, that doll, right? So I was thrilled. It came with a 45 RPM for those youngsters. That's a record. It was Edgar Bergen teaching you how to throw your voice. And again, dedicated to this career, I listened, I practiced for all about 10 minutes. And I realized this is not going to work for me. I don't like this. It's too hard to do. Scratch ventriloquist off. Veterinarian's still up there. Good. But then think, what am I going to do with this doll? I begged and pleaded. I got to do something. I got to get some fun out of this thing. So I get an idea. So I go to my bookshelf and I pull off Lord of the Rings. And if you look at the appendix of Lord of the Rings at the back, there's a section that has a bunch of Nordic runes. So I got a sheet of paper and I copied a few of those Nordic runes down and made it sort of cryptic looking, and I burnt the edges with a match. And I folded the paper up and I stuck it in the pocket of the doll. Let's fast forward. Picture me, 11 years old. Haven't really changed much in size. About this size when I was 11. I'm on my bed. Chuck's in his bed. Doll's sitting on the dresser between us. I go, Chuck, there's something sticking out of the pocket of the doll. Would you go see what that is? I don't know what's in there. He's all right. Takes the paper out, unwraps it. It's weird writing, Jim. Weird writing? Really? Yeah, looks old. Old? It's a new doll. Maybe they got me a used doll. Let me see. Look at that. I'm looking at it. You're right, Chuck. It is odd. And old. I'd almost say ancient. But you know what, Chuck? I think I recognize this writing. You do? Yeah, I think I might be able to translate it. You can? Yeah. Then do it. All right. Then I go to my bookshelf and I'm flipping through the books, throwing them over my shoulder until I get to, of course, Lord of the Rings. Flip to the back. Oh, look, Chuck, it's the same writing. It is! Now I'm pretty confident I really can translate this. Do it. All right, if you insist. Then, of course, diligently begin to translate it. Chuck, the message is becoming clear. Hang on a second. I think I got it. What did it say? After midnight, I rise and hunt for blood. Jim, do you think that's real? Looks real, doesn't it? But just in case, Chuck, let's take a couple precautions. Let's just fold this paper back up. Let's stick it back in the pocket of the doll so it didn't know we read it. And let's make sure before midnight that creature's locked up. Just reinforce it for a few nights. You know, Chuck, is the doll in the closet? Did he close that closet door? I think so. Did he close so it clicked shut? We don't want it pushing out and getting us tonight. Then the fun begins. Get up at 2 in the morning, take the doll out of the closet, stick it underneath my brother's blankets, and just wait for morning. Required changing a few sheets, but it was worth it. So that's this side of my brain. But this side of my brain didn't seem like a way to make money. I can, create a lot of tears and mischief, but it didn't seem a career. You do this, this, and this, and you can become a successful veterinarian. You can do this, this, and this, and fail horribly as a writer. So I went this other track. It made a little more sense. But the problem was I kept reading, and that's like throwing gasoline on this side of the brain. It's hard to let that go, and that voice in my head got louder and louder wanting to tell these stories. Even in vet school, I dabbled with writing short stories, but once I got out of vet school, it was just too busy. I just sort of set it aside, but I kept reading and reading. Eventually I thought, I'm going to have to let this out of my head. I got to do something with this. So I began writing a bunch of short fiction. I joined a writers club in Sacramento, and joined a critique group, and I workshopped 4 years, at least 40 short stories. Not a single one of them was ever published. They're now buried in my backyard, never to see the light of day. Based on that success, I decided to write my first novel. That took a little longer. It took me about a year to write my first novel. But I was very confident with it, just as I was with the short stories, and began sending it out there and having just about as much success. I got rejected by 49 different agents and editors out there. And the form rejection letters, they usually just, dear sir, ma'am, we hate your book, don't submit to us again, editor. But some editor might just give you the tiniest pat on the back, a bit of encouragement, some words of wisdom. Jim, we like that one character. Too bad the rest of your novel sucks. But you can live a long time as a wannabe writer, that get that little acknowledgement from New York. Just to give one example of a very kind editor who took pity on me and sent me the form rejection letter, but did write me a personal note. It was on the back of the form rejection letter, just 3 words of encouragement. This is unpublishable. You got to respect that because, he took the extra special time not only to reject me, but kick me in the nuts besides. So kudos on you, sir. But I've given it away because I said 49 different rejections, so you can guess there was a 50th who didn't reject it. But I did get that call eventually, and Pesha's the name of the agent who called me, and she said, Jim, I think I could sell this. And over time, it's a very long story and very involved. I don't know if you want to get into the do's and don'ts of trying to get published. But eventually she did find a home for it. We'll just jump there. She found a home for my first book, Subterranean. Then another book. And then another book. Then my clients at the veterinary hospital became suspicious that something was going on with Dr. Jim. Mostly because I had a poster in the lobby, get your cat spayed, get a free book. So I'm not above that, trust me. So questions would arise across the exam table. Dr. Jim, you had this successful veterinary hospital. What's this writing business? What's this, why are you writing these books, these crazy stories? What's wrong with you? What's your future goals in life? I'm thinking, boy, you guys are nosy. But as I drain your dog's anal glands, I will try to explain. For 15 years, veterinary medicine was my paycheck, and writing was just a hobby. The first few books didn't make much money, but it was fun to do. But I thought maybe down the line, it'd be nice to reverse that role, where veterinary medicine becomes my hobby, and writing becomes my paycheck. And I always resent when somebody says, former veterinarian. I get that occasionally during interviews because I am still licensed, I still practice. I work with a group that, I'm just volunteer work. I work with a group that traps feral cats in the Sacramento Valley. They bring them to the shelter. I spend 1 Sunday a month for about 8 hours spaying and neutering them. So now all I basically do with my veterinary degree is just remove genitalia. But it is a hobby. So I have achieved that goal. So that's roughly how a veterinarian became an author. there's some more convolutions. If the question comes in Q&A, I can expand upon that a little bit. But I'm going to go jump ahead and talk a little bit about Kingdom of Bones, and then get to the Q&A, because I'm curious why you're here. This is always a challenge, and I've attended a lot of book talks by different authors, and two things will either happen. Either they will tell you so much about the book that you now go, oh, I don't need to read it. You told me everything about it. Or they don't tell you enough, then you go, that doesn't sound intriguing enough, I'm not going to buy it. So I've got to walk a tight line right between those two. That leads right to a cash register. That is my goal today. So I developed this technique a while ago, and those that have heard me speak probably know what this technique is. So I'll need a moment of your silence, those who have heard me speak before, because I will be posing a question to the audience. The technique I've devised is by answering a question that if I don't answer it now, you're going to ask it during the Q&A anyways, so I'm going to get it out of the way, because it's a question that all authors hate. You want to make an author cringe? Walk up and ask them this question. Do you want to know what that question is? Guess. Those that have heard me speak before, do not guess, because they already heard. Anybody want this side? I don't think anybody raised their hand over here. Anybody here want to guess? What is the one question all authors hate to be asked?
What's your book about?
Nope. I'll talk about that all day long.
True story? True story.
True story? Nope.
Is it your last book?
Nope. I'm just wondering who would ask that question. Please. Is this your last book? That may be one I don't like as much. Yes, sir.
How do you get your ideas?
Thank you. Where do you get your ideas from? Don't ask that. We don't know. And we're afraid if you make us look at the process too closely and too intimately, whatever talent we have will evaporate and go away. Because it's a little magical, and so I'm going to explain where the idea from this came from. By the way, thank you for coming to my rescue there. There's a little trickle of sweat going down my back. Only one time in all the years I've been doing these talks has no one come up with that question. There was one audience just going on and on, and I was determined. I was not going to leave that theater that night until they got that question correct. Is it boxers or briefs? No, that is not the question all authors hate to hear. No, it was in Florida. What can I say? So, where did I get the idea for this book? Well, my process is a little weird, a little magical. I've always got my antenna up for an idea, and I'm looking basically for two things. I'm looking for a historical mystery, a piece of history that ends in a question mark, something I can solve within the pages of a novel. And I'm looking for something scientific, something sciencey that makes me go, what if? Where's that headed? How might that threaten us? And I just collect them. I subscribe to 23 different magazines, both print and in digital format. And whenever I come across something, a seed that might become a part of a story, I just either print it up or rip it out of the magazine. It goes into a box. I'm watching National Geographic one night, make some notes. Discovery Channel, make some notes. Lifetime Channel, doesn't really give me much help, but it all goes into a box. And what I found after a while is that box gets quite full. And it'd be very easy for one box to become two, then two to become four, then it's James Rollins on Hoarders. We don't want that. It must stay one box. I made a commitment to myself. But to keep it to one box, as you might imagine, I have to sift through it on a regular basis. And I have to weed through it, get rid of things that no longer either don't interest me anymore, or maybe the science has changed, or maybe another author has tackled that material, then I can throw it away. But what will happen, this is that bit of serendipity, that bit of magic that I can't really explain why it happens, is I'll be going through that, and either it'll be on the ground next to each other, or they'll be in my hand at the same time, this history, this science, and only them, because they just happen to be serendipitously, is that even a word? Luckily, next to each other, I begin to see some connection between the two, and I will do some research and realize, nope, I'm wrong, and they either go back in the box or I can throw them out, or they will begin to snowball, and I will say, oh yeah, this is a story I can tell. So that becomes the novel I work on. So I'm going to tell you, in describing this novel, I'm going to tell you the history and the science that came out of that box, sort of the core pieces. I'm not going to tell you how they connect, because again, there's a cash register somewhere in this building, right over there. But let me just give you the elevator pitch initially for Kingdom of Bones, and I'll tell you how that came about. How many people have read my book, Amazonia? So this is an easy description for those who have read Amazonia. Kingdom of Bones is where I take the Sigma Force characters, I throw them in the middle of Amazonia, and they get in so much trouble it requires Tucker and Kane to save them. That is Kingdom of Bones in a nutshell. For those that haven't read Amazonia, we'll just give it a little pause, maybe, or a long pause, or an infinite long. Apparently, no one wants you to know about Kingdom of Bones. Anyways, so Kingdom of Bones is big jungle epic. I always wanted to do a jungle epic. I had gone to Tanzania a decade ago, and I was working with a group that was rehabilitating western mountain gorillas. And that gave me the idea for doing a book that features a western mountain gorilla named Baco that was in the Bone Labyrinth. That was that experience that gave the birth to Baco. Now, if you read Bone Labyrinth, it is not a big jungle epic. But I knew when I was in Africa, I wanted to do a big jungle epic. So I was hoping to get to the Congo where this book takes place, but I was never able, because of COVID, to actually go there. But I had enough information when I was in Tanzania to be able to work on the story. So it's a big jungle epic. It starts when sort of all hell breaks loose at a UN relief camp deep in the Congo. The villagers, men, women, and children, are found to be in this dull, catatonic state, barely speaking, barely moving. But the environment around them, plants and animals of all sorts, have suddenly become more predatory, more toxic, more dangerous, and they seem to be evolving at an exponential pace. So it's up to Sigma Force to figure out, is what's going on a natural phenomenon? Is it man-made? And it leads them to sort of a great hunt for a secret that's buried at the heart of the African continent at a cursed location known as the Kingdom of Bones. Dun, dun, dun. There. So that's just the elevator pitch for the story. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how this came about. So Kingdom of Bones. That ties to the history that came out of the box. I'm always looking for that historical mystery, some piece of history that sort of intrigues me. And there's an interesting history in the middle of Africa that centers around a black Christian king who ruled a vast empire in Central Africa. His name was Prester John. He was rumored to be ruling this kingdom, and it's very, again, history is a little hazy. Maybe the 10th century, maybe the 11th century, maybe the 12th century, not quite sure when. It's said that Prester John is descended from Balthazar, who was one of the three Magi's who visited the Christ child in the manger. His legend is tied to the Fountain of Youth, to the King Solomon's Mine, even to Ark of the Covenant. As a thriller writer, that's intriguing to me. And for 3 centuries, like I said, not quite sure if it was the 10th, 11th, or 12th century, because there's some blurriness there, but everybody believed this legend. Kings sent emissaries. Popes sent doctors and emissaries to try to hunt down this mysterious king in the middle of the jungle. Most vanished. A few returned. Most said, nope, didn't find anything. But a few Portuguese explorers came back and said, yep, found him. Here's gold to prove it. But then after that, the story sort of quieted down. No one ever really could sort of verify that Prester John was a historical figure. So today, historians now believe that Prester John is just a myth. It's just a legend, that there's no historical basis to that. But me as a thriller writer, I'm thinking, how did this legend persist for 3 centuries? Why did those Portuguese guys come out and say, no, we found him, and they had gold to prove it? So to me, I'm always thinking there's usually a kernel of truth behind most stories and myths. So that got me thinking, what could possibly be the kernel of truth? Maybe his kingdom is still out there. Maybe James Rollins called it the Kingdom of Bones. Maybe that's where the title came from. So that's the history. Science. The science came about because I had an article that I found in early 2019 in New Scientist magazine. You can look it up. The article is titled, "When is the next global pandemic due?" Now, I had already done pandemic novels, so I thought, I don't want to do another pandemic novel. Sixth Extinction and Seventh Plague were pretty much straight on pandemic novels. But what intrigued me about the article, why I actually kept it and put it in that box, was that article talked about virus hunters. Now, these were brave men and women that were going out to lost corners of the world, sampling the wildlife out there, trying to see what might pose the next global pathogen, the next global pandemic pathogen. But what intrigued me especially is that a majority of virus hunters out there, veterinarians. So I thought, well, that's really cool. So into the box it went. So I found, eventually Prester John, and I found this. I'm not going to tell you how they tie together. Built a story, pitched it to my editor in the middle of 2019, began writing the story. March 2020 happens. Get a call from my editor. Jim, did those virologists you were speaking to in 2019 in preparation for this novel, did they warn you about this global pandemic that was due to hit? And I said, no, they did not. I wish they did. But what they were telling me before, and especially the first months of the pandemic, was quite scary. Because I was hearing two different things. In this era, I was hearing what the national response was, and what the public health people were saying, what the government was saying. In this year, remember early in the pandemic, they were saying, no, don't worry about masks. You don't need to wear masks. Masks are silly. Just save it for the doctors out there. In public, you don't need to wear a mask. Whereas in this year, the virologists are going, biosafety level 4 uniform suit is what I recommend that you wear at all times from here on out, Jim. So they were giving me a lot of secrets about what was going on early in the pandemic, sort of a behind the scenes look at what virology, how they were panicked initially, because they were concerned, and what they're looking for when these virus hunters are out there looking for things, looking for something called disease X. That's the boogeyman of the virology world. That is a pandemic organism that does three things. It spreads rapidly, usually through the air. It mutates rapidly, and has no known cure. Does that sound vaguely familiar to anybody in this room? They were concerned that because the coronavirus had such a high mutation rate, that we may be facing disease X with this outbreak. So that's what I'm hearing in March of 2020. So I'm panicking, both thinking, is this disease X, is this really going to be the end of humankind? Well, obviously it's not. But also had the thought, I better not write this book. Because I don't know if it's disrespectful to the men and women out there, the doctors and nurses on the front lines battling this disease, or the families that have lost family members to this disease, to write basically a popcorn jungle epic adventure story that features viruses. Is that disrespectful? So I thought about it for a while. Thought maybe I shouldn't even be writing this. And but I kept getting so interesting information from the virologists out there, and from also medical doctors and evolutionary biologists about viruses in general. That I thought it was really important because it gives you a lot of insight about what viruses, how they function, where they come from, what not only shining a light on this current pandemic, but what might come next. So I thought, well, this is important enough. I'm going to, I want to share this with people anyway. So I'm going to finish this novel. So this novel was finished then in that summer. And so we had, if you remember when Amazon or the bookstores had the release date was supposed to come out last summer. Then what happened? Variant. Because my last book, Last Odyssey, came out in March 2020. Yay, when all the bookstores closed. So trust me, this is a much better way of communicating than trying to do a book tour by Zoom. That is one of the 9 circles of hell, is trying to do a book tour on Zoom. This is much pleasanter. So they said, we obviously don't want to put your book out in another outbreak of the pandemic. So, summer came, variant, things were beginning to close down. I remember for a short period of time, we were taking our masks off, and no, put it back on. So the book got shoved to December. They're like, oh, December. It'll be over by then. We'll have forgotten even what it is. December rolls around. Omicron. Uh-oh. I was actually fearful of looking at my email, and then it came. Jim, we need to talk. That's never good news. We're moving you to April to get away from Omicron. So luckily, the book is out, and so far we're okay. But for a while I was thinking, I'm causing the pandemic. My pub date somehow has gotten to the coronavirus to mutate just when I pick my dates. But that's how Kingdom of Bones came about. So I'm not going to tell you how Prester John ties to virology or how that all ties to the elevator pitch I told you, because of course I said, over there. That's the answer. So I'm going to stop the formal talk and just open up for Q&A, because I'm, like I said, always curious why you're here. So anybody have any questions? Thank you for starting out. We'll get water while you do that.
I'm looking on the cover art of this.
Yes.
They must be bones.
Bones forming sort of a radiological warning symbol.
Yes, that's what I thought immediately.
Yep. Now, did I have anything to do with that cover? Nope.
But
Did it have anything to do with the title? Nope. If you also remember what back in the early summer of the first release date, it had a different name. It's called the Savage Zone. They loved that title. And then when they moved it, said, now we're bored with that title. Name it something different. Authors had very little control over the cover art, and apparently very little control over the name. Anybody else?
What
Yes, sir.
would you have named it?
But I was happy with the Savage Zone, but they just, that was one of the, I gave them like 10 names, and the sales department and marketing department then sort of test it and find out what seems to, trigger the most response. And then they said, this is what it is. And I said, okay. Well, at least they usually, it's one of the 10. They don't make it up themselves. Except for one time. I hate this title. Not this title. I hate the title of the book I'm about to describe. It's usually because I don't know what they're going to pick. I've learned early on, after a while, I'm not even going to put a title on my manuscript that I'm working on because it's just useless. We're going to go through 1,000 different iterations of this name. So for my book, Black Order, that was just the working title. Boring as hell. Black Order, boring. So I turned my manuscript in, and we went through the editorial process with my editor, Lissa. And eventually I'm like, Lissa, when we're having the title discussion, she goes, what do you mean? Here's the cover art with the title. Black Order. I don't want that title. I don't like it. So we have very little control over the matter.
Are you writing your next book already?
Of course, yeah. So the sequel or not sequel, but the next book in the Sigma universe takes place in Australia. It deals with Aboriginal mythology. Very cool stuff. You're going to learn about Aboriginal mythology. And it deals with early Australian colonial history, so when the British were in Australia. It also deals with a treasure hunt for an artifact that might prove that we are not alone in the universe. So that's coming up next.
Is that still Sigma?
Sigma, yes. Yes, sir. We'll get to you in a second.
What made you want to write fantasy stuff again? Because I'm currently reading the Moonfall book.
Thank you for asking that. Settle in, folks. This takes a bit of an explanation. I'm glad you asked, but I hate that you asked that question. No, it's totally fine. So why did I wander off from doing straight sort of staccato pace, bio thriller, scientific thrillers, military type of thrillers to epic fantasy? It seems like a departure, but actually it's a return to my roots. So let's go back to that story I was telling you about getting published. Remember those 49 different rejections I was telling you about? It takes a while to get 49 different rejections. It's a long, slow process of sending your query letters and your partials and your manuscript. And each one takes months to get response. So it took a while to get 49 different rejections. And like as I mentioned, not particularly kind rejections. This is unpublishable. So that got set in my head. So I thought, well, maybe I'm not a thriller writer. So I'm going to write something else while I'm trying to get a response. And since this is not having any luck, I'm going to start writing a fantasy novel. So I began working on this fantasy novel. I was halfway through that fantasy novel when I get that 50th call from Pesha, my agent, who says, Jim, I think I can sell Subterranean, but I need a workhorse. I'm not satisfied with just one book. What are you working on now? I said, well, I'm thrilled you asked. I'm about halfway through a fantasy book that I'm very excited about. It's first in a series. I think it's a pretty cool concept. She goes, I can still hear that noise right through the phone. She goes, I hate fantasy. I don't know any of the fantasy editors. I don't know any fantasy publishers. Stop writing that crap. Give me another thriller. I want another thriller. I can do so much if you give me another thriller. So I'm thinking there, I got half the book done. I've laid out the railroad tracks. I know where it's going to end. The book she's trying to sell is unpublishable. But I don't want to lose her. So yes, Pesha, I'll stop writing this. I'll write a thriller. I was lying through my teeth. I had no intention of not finishing this. Because, it was almost done, and this is unpublishable. Good luck, woman. You'll never sell that piece of crap I wrote. This was the beginning of summer when I got that call. The other impetus for not giving up was that I had submitted part of this story to a contest for the Maui Writers Conference. It's going to be my first literary conference. Like I said, I'm self-taught. Everything was, I had no formal training in writing. If you read the end of my books, you'll go, he's had no formal training in writing. So I was I wanted to go to a conference and listen to these different speakers speak about the craft and hone my skills, and that was going to be at the end of summer, and so they had a contest. I wanted to submit part of the fantasy to that. So I thought, I made a commitment. I'm just going to work on this fantasy over the summer until I get to the conference at the end of summer, and we'll just see what happens. So I finished the book. By the end of summer, I fly out to Maui, very relieved. Now, Pesha, all summer long, began collecting rejection notices. My response was, ha ha, I told you it was unpublishable. Not exactly the sentiment you should have as you're an author. Told you, you'll never publish that. So I go to this conference, and the first day of the conference, there's a meet and greet tea, where the 600 participants can rub shoulders and elbows with the speakers and panelists. Being a literary event, they require gentlemen to wear jackets. You can wear a Hawaiian shirt, but you have to wear a jacket. Literary. If you have like a leather patch right here on your elbow, extra points. Now keep in mind, this is Maui at the end of summer, in a crowded ballroom with 600 plus attendees and me. As soon as those doors opened, I swear everybody closed into little cliques and began talking amongst themselves, usually about me probably, I'm sure of that. And I just get nervous, and I don't know how to function in that type of environment. I'm not a cocktail type of, party type of guy. And you sidle up to a group and go, I like dogs, and just hope for the best. Don't know how to break into that crowd, so I get more and more nervous, and I blame dehydration on this next act. I look across the room, this crowded ballroom, and I see somebody I recognize from Sacramento. Now, it's just a friend of a friend, but trust me, at this point, an acquaintance is good enough. We're going to be bonded at the hip for the rest of this conference. So I rush to him with relief, and I grab him on the shoulder and give him a little shake. What are you doing here? I can't believe you're here. He turns around, and it's Ron Howard, the director. It's Opie from Mayberry. Ron usually wears a cap, because he doesn't have a lot of hair up here. And when he was not wearing his cap, and he looked a little bit like my friend from Sacramento, but he was not. So he turns to me and goes, well, sir, I was invited. I'm like, just checking. Make sure you're not party crashing. Just slink away. And now I'm even more nervous because I think, now I got to worry about Ron Howard's security on top of all this other trepidation. Then I look across the crowded ballroom, and I see somebody I recognize. This time I circled him a few times. Check the name tag. And it's Terry Brooks, who is the international bestseller of the Shannara series. He pronounces it different. He's wrong. It's Shannara. It's phonetically how it's spelled. I don't know why he pronounces it different. He adds extra syllables in it. It's Shannara. And I did what, oh, Mr. Brooks, if nothing else, coming to the conference meeting you is, I've read you in junior high and high school. It's just inspiration to meet you. And he did one of these. Oh no, that's never a good sign. Yeah, I'm a fan of yours too, buddy. I thought, oh, I've learned something at this conference. Terry Brooks is a jerk. And he goes, no, I'm serious. I recognize your name tag. I was one of the judges at this year's conference, and I read your fantasy submission. And based on that, I have an editor come to this conference with me because he wants to talk to you. So I got offered a 3-book fantasy contract with Del Rey Books from the Personal Introduction by Terry Brooks. So I hurry up to my hotel room after the things, call Pesha. Pesha, I think I sold my fantasy novel. Would you help me do the contract so I don't get screwed over? She's like, sure, I love fantasy. Nothing like that 15% to engender great love. And she goes, by the way, I've also got 2 publishing houses currently bidding for Subterranean. So I flew into Maui, unpublished, flew out of Maui, 2 different publishers, 2 different genres, 2 different pen names. Life got very confusing. So for a while, I was doing a thriller year and a fantasy year for the first decade of my career. Under James Clemens for the fantasy, James Rollins for the thrillers. James Rollins became a little more popular. HarperCollins wanted more books. One of my fantasy publishers was like hemming and hawing whether they wanted more of my Godslayer series. So I thought, well, screw you. I can't wait. I have a mortgage. I signed another contract with HarperCollins. And then James Clemens sort of faded away for a while. But I've always still read fantasy, still love fantasy. So I had this idea for Starless Crown that's over there. About 7 years ago. I pitched it to my editor 7 years ago, said, hey, I got this cool idea, write this scientific article about tidally locked planets. Those are planets that circle the sun with one side forever facing the sun, one side forever in darkness. Pretty cool, I thought. Our moon is a tidally locked satellite around our planet. One side of the moon faces us, one side doesn't. And there's planets out in the universe that do that also. So I read a Scientific American article about that. I was really intrigued. But I was curious whether life could exist on that planet. So I had an astrophysicist friend and said, hey, could life survive? Could there be life on a tidally locked planet? He said, well, sure. Because of the tidal forces between the 2 extremes, there's going to be probably a livable climb between the 2. Between this sort of twilight band between the hot and the cold, something could live there. Cool. But what's going to live there? So then I talked to evolutionary biologists, to xenobiologists, began populating it, did maps, did creatures. Very horrible pictures of creatures. They're just like, like that. It's not good. In the book, there's actually like naturalist drawing of some of the creatures in the books, but I did not do them. They were done by a beautiful graphic artist named Dania Fiddler. Did maps of the world, and so that folder got fatter and fatter and fatter. And then what happened was COVID. I got delayed with this book, so I thought, well, I'm going to do something else. Pulled out a big folder. So that became Starless Crown. We're sort of a 4-book series. So back to thriller year and a fantasy year. I've always done 2 books every year. I've always done like my main thriller, whether it's a Sigma Force or standalone, then something else, whether it's the Jake Ransom series, whether it's the Sanguinus series, or just other things. So it's not much different, just wandered a little bit off the path. So like I said, very long answer. That's why I was like, oh no, I got to tell the story, because it takes a bit of explanation. Yes?
How many years from when you began your first idea of writing to when you were actually first published?
It took, like I said, about 4 years of writing short. The desire was always there, and I dabbled, but it was very sporadic and indeterminate. Like I said, even in vet school, I was working on short stories. Nothing ever got published. Never really even finished a lot of the short stories. I just started them. I really wasn't dedicated until when I started to join that group and join the critique group. And so about 4 years of writing short fiction, and then a year writing my novel, and that would took about maybe 2 years after that to get published. So from the time I got committed to writing to the time I saw my first book on the shelf was probably about 8 years. Slow process. Back there.
About the Odyssey book?
Yes.
And yes or no answer is fine.
Yeah, I'm sure. At this point, probably no one asks many questions because he will never shut up.
I'm curious if you got feedback from any of the 3 faiths that you mentioned that are involved in the story.
The 3 what?
Faiths.
Faiths. Faiths?
Yes.
No one's ever, tried to kill me. I guess from some of the stuff I was claiming in there. Though, I mean, it'd be tempting to have like a pogrom put against me, but probably not. I have to call Salman Rushdie and see how he enjoys that experience. Probably not. Yes, sir, Ben back.
The book you said that's coming up in Australia, try not to do a spoiler. In this last book, there was a certain team member that was MIA. Is that team member going to be?
Yes. There's a whole reason why she is not in this story is because what's happening with them right now, when the next book picks up, it's backtracking a little bit, is that she's actually been having some problems while they've been going through this. So it's going to pick up her storyline, and she's featured prominently in this next book. And because she's featured so prominently, I thought, well, it's okay for her to be a little bit in the shadows for right now. Yes?
Are you going to Australia or have you been to?
I've already been to Australia.
Going back?
Oh, I would like to go back, but there's a lot of restrictions right now because of COVID in Australia and New Zealand. So, but the problem is the book is almost done, so I don't need to go back to Australia. I would just go for the fun of it, and like I'm researching. Okay, nice to know. Maybe we'll meet up there. Drinks on Sydney Harbor. Yes, sir. I'll get you in a second.
What have been some of your favorite locations to research for all the different books?
Favorite locations. I generally, by the way, I don't necessarily research for my books. I generally just travel for the fun of it, and then I take pictures, I journal. Like I said, I went to Tanzania. It was there I got the idea for doing Baco. I did a USO tour to Iraq and Kuwait in the winter of 2010 as the Iraq War was dying down, and saw handlers working with their dogs. That became the impetus for doing Tucker and Kane. So it's usually the traveling. I didn't fly out to Iraq to see dogs being handled. I went just happenstance. When I was in Spain, one of the things I like to do when I travel is walk up to somebody and say, hey, tell me something that nobody knows about your village, a secret. And weirdly, because of that anonymity, it's like, wow. Some of these raciest stories I've heard. So when I was in Spain, there was a woman that I asked that question to in a little village in northern Spain, and she said, "Oh, see that door over there that has a symbol burnt in it?" And I'm like, "I guess." And she took me over there and she showed me the symbol burnt in the door. I said, "What does that mean?" So that means that there used to be a witch that lived here, and that a witch. And that the mark on there is a mark from the Spanish Inquisition. I thought, well, the Spanish Inquisition isn't around anymore. She goes, oh no, that mark was put there 10 years ago. She was claiming, in which I'm sort of got further corroboration of, that there is a sect of the Spanish Inquisition that still is surviving, still is out there hunting witches. So that became my book, The Crucible. So that's how I usually, it's that type of traveling that excites me. But I mean, being the naturalist that I am, I love going to the Congo, I like going to the Amazon, anything sort of like off the beaten track I prefer more than a big city type of thing. Do you have a question?
On Starless,
Yes.
have you started writing your second book?
Oh yeah, it's almost done. It's called, it has a title. It got settled on. There was a debate for a while. It's called Cradle of Ice is the second book in the series. We don't know what the next book in the, well, let me just ask you this. Like I said, I already submitted my 10 ideas for the title of that Australian Sigma book. And right now they're banding between The Petrified Sea and Tides of Fire. Those are the two that they're leaning towards right now, though it'll probably be neither of them. But right now, that's what they're debating. So.
When will that be out?
Cradle of Ice is February of next year. Whatever the name of the title is going to be, the Sigma novel will be June of next year. They're trying to shift me over to be a beach read. They want to get, because when I started, I was always a beach read. I was always a summer release. Then I got discombobulated. I'm in some weird part of the season. Let's get you back to beach reading. But way in the back.
I'm a big Kowalski fan.
And you should be.
How do you decide how much to use and stick him in?
How much use Kowalski? Well, Kowalski first appeared in one of my standalones, Ice Hunt. That's where he originated from. And 4 or 5 books later, I sort of missed Kowalski. I loved writing him. He was a fun character. So I thought, well, doesn't really belong in Sigma, but I'm going to recruit him anyways. So, because I just like him. He's fun. He's got layers to him that are fun to peel. It's what the story demands more than anything else. I mean, I had never done in Sigma universe. I had never done a point of view where Kowalski was a point of view character, where you're seeing action through his eyes and through his head. He was always the third person character in the story, until I did Bone Labyrinth. Bone Labyrinth is the first one where he gets to have his own point of view, because I thought it was necessary, because the book dealt with Neanderthals. So it felt very appropriate that Kowalski would be the point of view character in a Neanderthal novel. So it's what the stories demand more than anything. Do you have a question right there?
Are there rising stars in your genre that you're excited?
Are there rising stars in
your genre?
You know, I read a lot of blurbs. So there's a lot of new authors coming out that I'm very excited about. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. I just read a blurb from, and I'm just drawing the blank. Let me think about it for a second. It'll come to me. It's right at the tip of my tongue. Anybody else while I think about that? Yes?
What authors and or books have influenced you?
What authors have influenced me? I grew up reading a bunch of different genres, not just the thrillers. Like I said, I was reading fantasy, I was reading science fiction, I was reading military thrillers, I was reading Clive Cussler's adventure fiction. But probably the biggest influence, I think, that sort of embedded in my head, I became sort of addicted to the old pulp novels from the 30s and 40s, The Shadow, The Avenger, but specifically Doc Savage. Doc Savage is a sort of bigger-than-life hero that's surrounded by a group of friends that are specialists in different fields, mostly scientific fields. He'll go out against and protect against various weird scientific threats. Does that sound vaguely familiar? One of Doc's buddies is a character named Monk. So that's where Monk came from. This is my little tip of the hat towards Doc Savage. So big influence. Also Michael Crichton. You know, I would think that I get compared to him a lot, and rightfully so. Not that I write as well as he did, but I appreciate that honor, because I had a copy of Jurassic Park sitting above my workstation while I was writing my first novel, Subterranean. But like I said, I'd already done short fiction prior to that. I wasn't quite sure how to pace a novel, and no one taught me. Self-taught. I thought, well, I like Jurassic Park. I'm going to use that as a template. So I thought, well, how many pages is it until you see a dinosaur? Okay, that's how many pages I'm going to make sure you see one of my creatures. You know, when does somebody get killed in his book? Well, that's when I kill somebody in my book. You know, when does a villain first appear? Well, that's when I'm going to make my villain first appear. So I use it basically as a template rather than reinventing the wheel. It's a beautiful structured story. So Michael Crichton, another big influence. Yes?
So when did you kind of it ring to you that your voice was good enough to publish, that you have something that is unique? Because I think creating your authentic voice is a lot of authors struggle with.
Still waiting for that. 40 books in, I'll get it right eventually. I think it was I was writing that short fiction. It wasn't, even though nothing got published. I felt confident enough that I was getting the tools down pretty good. You know, whenever an author has a story, it's like a bright, shiny penny in their head. And your goal when you're writing your novel is to try to make that story as bright as the penny that's in your head, the idea shine as much as it's in your head. And it never works. You never get quite to what's in your head. When I start a story, it's just a really cool idea. When I'm done with the story, you know, it's close, but not as good as I want it to be. So it took me a while to where I got close enough, thought, you know, I can almost make that story the way I want it to be. And that's when I felt comfortable enough to think, okay, I can tackle a novel. But I mean, I still have a lot of insecurity. I call it the middle doldrums. I thought it was just me, but whenever I get to the middle of a book, I decide, when you're starting a book, you're excited, it's a new concept, that shiny penny's bright in your head, and you're working on it, and you're throwing balls in the air, and setting the things up, and then you get to the middle of the book, it's like, oh no, this is crap. I cannot get these balls to land. I don't even know where half these balls are supposed to land. There's no way I can finish this book. It's going to be horrible. But I have a deadline, and they're going to pay me, so I better finish it. And then my dad says, no, it was fine. I don't know what I was worried about. Won't happen next novel. Happens every single time. Happens every frickin' single time. I get to the middle of the book, and I hate it. And I thought, it's never going to work. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know what talent I've lost. It's evaporated. Somebody asked me too many times, where do I get my ideas from? Anybody else? At the back again.
I think Tucker and Kane are two of the best new characters you added to Sigma. Are you any plans to make them a standalone?
Oh, they have been. They first appeared in Bloodline. Because that was shortly after I returned from that USO tour, and I really want to try to capture that dynamism between so again, veterinarian out in Iraq, seeing handlers working with the dog. I'm like, can I pet your dog? They're like, if you want to lose a hand, go ahead. But I was curious about the relationship of those two, and so I got to talking to them, came back and interviewed more handlers, went to Lackland Air Force Base and saw how they train the dogs, and I want to try to bring, like that shiny penny, I want to try to bring them into their best light. And so I tried writing them to a short story. I don't know if the short story collection's here, but I did a short story feature them first, just to try to write them. And at first I was just writing from Tucker's side of the leash. But then I realized, what I kept hearing from these handlers is a phrase called "it runs down the lead," saying that over time, between the leash and the handler, their emotions flow up and down this leash to the point where the handler can read the dog can read the handler without almost any type of communication necessary at all. And that really intrigued me. So then I realized my mistake with trying to write just from one end of the lead is there's another four-legged soldier over here. So then it was challenging to try to write a point of view scenes from the dog's point of view without it like being a Disney dog that breaks out in song halfway through the book. I wanted to feel authentic. I wanted to lean on my veterinary background. I wanted to, talk to the animal behaviorists that were working with these dogs and make it as authentic as I can of a presentation of this hero. So I practiced the short story, then introduced them to Sigma and Bloodline. Then I spun them off and wrote two standalones featuring them with Grant Blackwood, Kill Switch and Warhawk. It's just solo adventures with them. But then I knew then a couple more short stories after that featuring them. But then I knew I wanted to bring them eventually back to Sigma, so this was a good point to bring them back into the story. So that's Tucker and Kane. Yes, sir.
Do you write the book from beginning to end, or do you work on other books at the same time?
I tried writing books simultaneously. It just doesn't work for me. I tried writing Sandstorm in one of my fantasy novels. And it was like stripping your gears in your head, as they're very different speeds that you write at and very different techniques. And it slowed me way down. So I'd have to go, one book, then the other book. And I do write linearly. Remember again, for this phrase back in your elementary school years or your high school years, when they tell you, okay, you're going to have this standardized test. But if you get stuck on a problem, skip it and continue on and then come back to it. No way. I ain't moving forward till I get something on this page for this question here. I will just sit there and look at that question till the clock runs out. I have to do it. I have to do it very systematically.
Do you know how they're going to end when you start, or do you figure it out as you go?
Do I know the beginning and ending of my stories? I do. I do know that much. I know. I don't work from a great outline. I work from a skeletal outline, is what I describe. I know the beginning, I know the end, I know a few stopping points in between, but I don't know how A connects to B, connects to C. To me, one of the joys of writing is that discovery between those tent poles, where things change, surprising things happen, things I would never have been able to pre-plot out. Initially, early in my career, my editor, Alyssa, required me, before they paid me, to tell them what the story was. Rude of them. And not just like a thumbnail sketch. They wanted 20 pages, single-spaced, every single turn and twist and subplot and character laid out. So I would do that because I want to get paid. They would pay me. I go home and write the book, turn it in. She'd go, "This is nothing like the outline you turned in." "Well, do you like it?" "Yeah." "Let's shut up." So I found it doesn't work for me anyways if I try to outline in great detail, because I'm just going to go off the path. So that is, and it's a good question. It's just me. Every author's different. Some authors, Jeffrey Devers, I don't know if you read Jeffrey Dever, he is all about outlining. The joke about Jeffrey Dever is he writes a 20-page outline, or 200-page outline, then throws in dialogue and he's done. Whereas there are the organic writers that write from the seed of the plants. Now, they don't know anything about the story. They don't know who the characters are. They don't know the plot. They don't know anything. They just sit with a blank sheet of paper and let the story come forth. And I've been at writing panels where there's been, all about should you outline or shouldn't you outline. And there's a group of panelists that outline, a group of panelists that don't. By the end of that panel, they're usually in a fist fight because their brains are wired so differently. So it's, there's no right answer to what works for them. Anybody else?
Did you ever wonder about borrowing ideas from other books you read, like Preston Child and something like that?
Preston Child. No. I mean, I always hear occasionally from authors, I don't get this, is that they say, oh, I don't want to read anymore, or I don't have time to read anymore, or I'm afraid of being influenced by other readers, other books. I read all the time. I'm a voracious reader. Whenever I teach writing, I always tell people, there's an old adage, you need to write every day, you need to practice your craft, you should expect to write 1,000,000 words before you should expect to be published. And I add my own caveat to that, besides writing every day, you should be reading every night. Because whatever problem, whatever knot ties in your head during the day, like how to do dialogue or how to introduce a character without them looking in a mirror, when you see how an author does that at night when you're reading, it begins to untie that knot in your head. And so your prose is naturally going to become stronger as you're struggling during your writing day and having that solution at night. So today, every day, whenever not only is there a book beside my bedside, there's also a tablet. So if I see a writer doing something unique or different, I jot it down. I'm still in that education process. I'm still trying to learn to see what other authors are doing to challenge me to try something different in my own writing by reading still. So plus I like it, so that helps too. Yes.
Who do you enjoy reading?
I still read, the usual standbys. Steve Berry requires me to read his book every year. I like Steve Berry. He's a good friend. Douglas Preston Lincoln Child always hit all the Pendergast books. I'll give you one anecdote about borrowing ideas. So if you look at the cover of Excavation, there is a quote from Douglas Preston, a little blurb for them. When that blurb came from Douglas Preston, it came with a little caveat. It says, oh, Jim, we liked your novel, here's your blurb. But we need to tell you, Jim, you wrote a book, Excavation, about this asteroid that hits the planet in the ancient past that is carrying a strange package that changes the globe. Link and I just finished a novel called Ice Limit, which is all about an asteroid that crashes into the Earth that carries a package that changes things in present day. So I just want to know I'm not copying you. So, we do step on each other's toes occasionally when it comes to storytelling, but it's even though we had the same gist of idea, very different books, so it's almost impossible to really overstep on somebody else's toes. So I'm not afraid of, somebody leaning on my idea or somebody else leaning on my idea. Like Steve Berry and I, we independently both decided we were going to do a story tying about the early history of the Smithsonian Castle. And of course, I should have done it, because where Sigma Force located beneath the Sigma Castle. But there goes Mr. Berry tromping on my territory. But again, very different stories. So it doesn't really matter if we have to lean on each other's ideas a little bit. Yes, sir.
Talking about dual writers, when you wrote with
Grant Blackwood or Rebecca Cantrell?
Yeah. How does that process work with you?
It was, again, I mentioned before, I do 2 books a year. The books, Sigma book or some other type of mainstream thriller than something else. Well, for the something else, I had this idea for doing a book on vampires in the Vatican. That was my thought too. So it came about because I was looking at a painting of the Raising of Lazarus by Rembrandt, and I won't go into a long story, but it got my juices flowing about the relationship between Catholicism and the mythology of Catholicism, how it seems to, those ties weirdly with the stories of vampires. So anyways, it got convoluted. But I had this idea, and I thought it was cool, so I began writing it. It wasn't coming out. Remember that bright, shiny penny I was trying to? It wasn't coming close. I knew this just wasn't really working. It wasn't getting that gothic quality that I wanted in the book. And I realized this is not a real wheel well that is comfortable for me. Now, I've known Rebecca Cantrell since before she was published. She took a writer's retreat class with me where I was teaching a group of students, 12 of us, a week-long writer's retreat at the Maui Writers Conference. There I was returning later as a teacher at that conference. And in that same class, by the way, is it was a brilliant class. So I had Rebecca Cantrell, but also Mark Graney. You ever know Mark Graney? Does the Gray Man series. So he was also in that class. And I knew Rebecca was going to be a star. I mean, she didn't need me, basically, what I'm trying to say. And so when her first book came out, I gave her a blurb for her first book. And she writes mysteries set between World War I and World War II. It's the Hannah Vogel mystery series. Very good at creating sets of place and time with an efficiency of words that I can't manage. She's good at creating that gothic type of quality. So I was reading one of her latest Hannah Vogel mysteries when I was struggling with writing my first draft of The Blood Gospel. And I thought, oh, this is what this book needs. It needs this. So I called Rebecca and I said, Rebecca, would you want to collaborate with me on a book? I have this idea, and I think if we bring our two skills together, I can bring the science and the history and the weird animals. You bring this gothic historical quality that you can bring to the story. I think the story can be told in its best light. I can make that penny shine even brighter. And she goes, well, what's it about? I said, it's vampires. She goes, no. Never in a million years will I write a vampire novel. Well, I said, well, it's not really a vampire novel. Well, yes, there are vampires, so it is a vampire novel. But let me just explain what I really mean. So I laid out the whole historical aspect of the story and laid it all out. And she said, oh, actually, she is pretty cool. So she was swayed. And so we agreed to work on it. But we had never collaborated. I'd never collaborated. It was something new I was going to try on my other part of the year, is do a collaboration with Rebecca. We didn't know how to speak to each other initially. She was living in Hawaii still. Eventually she moved to Berlin, I think, to get further away from me. But every Monday we would talk on Zoom, and we'd share chapters and talk about what worked, what didn't, and challenge each other a little bit. And initially we were pussyfooting around a little bit. It was like, Rebecca, I really like what you did with this chapter. This character's really cool, and I like the ambiance you have here, but maybe if you just tweak this just a little bit. But eventually it got down to, Jim, this chapter really sucks. Can you try again? Once you got to that level of honesty, things got going much faster. So it took us a while to try to find that way of communicating with each other. So I did a couple of collaborations, and it was fun. Rebecca just emailed me a couple of days ago, because we always sort of talked about maybe doing another cycle of stories in that universe. It'd be fun to go back there again. So we'll eventually get back to doing a collaboration, but right now it's just me. Yes?
I am the moderator for ATL Read.
Yes?
I told you we're going to read your book, The Starless Crown, at October 18th.
October 18th?
Yep. And I want to know what question you would ask the reader at that time. What would be one question you really want to ask them to answer after they read the book?
What question would I want the reader who reads Starless Crown to answer if I could pose one question to the readership? And I would think that's a good question. No one's ever asked me that before. What would I want to ask them? Boxers or briefs? That's tempting. No, probably it would be about, one of the reasons I really wanted this story is prior to becoming a veterinarian, I had my undergraduate years, which was in biology with an emphasis on evolutionary biology. So this story deals with a lot of development of different animals. So I think I would like to get an idea of whether people would want to live in that world. Mm-hmm. Is that, there's pros and cons to living in the world I create. And I was curious who would want to live, and if they want, where would they want to live? Because in Starless Crown you see different aspects of this world. Close to the cold part, into the burning sand area, in between. The second book will go deep into the cold area. So I'm just curious, whenever I read a fantasy book, I want to live there. I want to live in Middle Earth. I want to live in Shannara and tell people how to properly pronounce that name. So I'd be curious, would you want to live in this world, and if so, where? Mm-hmm. Sure. Yes, sir.
So, a lot of your novels have same characters and interconnected characters. When you come up with an idea that maybe contradicts something that happened in the past with characters and whatnot, what's your process for resolving that? Like, do you really like the idea? Do you go with it, or like?
Well, I do have like a Bible for each of the characters. I try to stick to that as well as I can. Not that mistakes don't happen. I'm not going to ruin anything. Monk lost a hand at one point. Map of Bones. And at one point, in another book, he lost his other hand by accident. I switched. That does happen. But mostly, I try to make sure that there's continuity. Similar like a director, make sure there's not like a Starbucks cup in the middle of the Game of Thrones scene. You try your best you can to make sure that you're accurate as possible. So I do have a whole Bible of each story, of each character arc and whatnot. So I think we have enough for one more question. Better be good. Pressure's on.
What is your favorite book of all time?
See.
Your second favorite.
Of mine, or just in general?
Of yours.
Of mine, okay. Well, I told the answer to her earlier today. It's an answer that I was taught by Lee Child. You ever know Lee Child? Very tall British gentleman. So we were at a conference, and as writers are wont to do at a conference, we were slightly drunk around a table. And Lee was like, I heard you stumbling around with that answer about, that question. I'll tell you what the right answer is. The most expensive one. That's why he's brilliant. Now that being facetious, this is one of my favorite books I've written in the Sigma universe in a while. It does sound now that I've just said that, but I really like this novel a lot. Maybe because I got an extra year to tweak it and play with it and play with the storyline a little bit. I think it's pretty cool. So, and that's it. We are done. So at some point I'm going to be signing books. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it.
Thank you, James, for sharing your time and your insight with us tonight. And I think everybody in this room would probably agree we'd much rather do this in person than on a Zoom call. I'd also like to thank Eagle Eye Books for coming out tonight and being our bookseller. We still have the silent auction items going. Mother's Day's coming up. There's a Cinco de Mayo basket. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Seeing all your faces makes putting on these events worthwhile. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the library staff, the adult programming section of the Gwinnett County Public Library for arranging these events. There's a lot of work involved. Please check the calendar on the library website for future author events. Mr. Rollins will sign books as soon as I'm finished up here. If you've got a lot of books, can you kind of let the people with just one or two books go ahead? If you'd form a single file line to my left here by Miss Denise, and you'll get your book signed.